And I mean, I think the city can and should continue to grow and evolve, but to do it in a way that is the San Francisco way, not necessarily the. I mean, we've made some pretty profound mistakes, and Infinite City touches on them in great detail. It was called redevelopment or urban renewal or black removal, and I don't want to repeat those mistakes again. And I think we've learned a lot, and there's this whole narrative that is sweeping over not just San Francisco, although weirdly enough it emanates from San Francisco, that is antithetical to creating healthy neighborhoods where our hotel and restaurant workers and our teachers and all of us can live together in a society that's full of queer folks and characters and poets and musicians and artists and Rebecca Solnit. So that's kind of a large part of why I'm running.
Well, I think I'm pretty safe here, but I endorsed you, support you. Wish I'd done more, but I've been doing national stuff too, because it's scary out there. But I really feel like Erin is the one candidate who's really for a San Francisco for everybody. And I've been here since 1980, grew up nearby, and have seen that the city, which was a great refuge city for people coming from the dirty wars of Central America, from homophobia in their small towns, from all from anti-Semitism, from racism in the South. The black population of San Francisco increased tenfold during World War II as people came for the shipyard jobs, but from Jim Crow. And just seeing the sheer expensiveness of the city push so many people out. And I was thinking about the Google bus protests around 2013 and wondering how many of the people who did that are still here. And I joke that I don't want to be the last bohemian in San Francisco. And, I own my flat, I'm stable. But it's really, I want a city for everyone. And by which I don't mean the homeless should stay homeless, but we know, and I've been here long enough to remember San Francisco really before homelessness, and hope that I live to see San Francisco after homelessness, and that might be a good place to start, because I know you have a really thoughtful homelessness plan.
Yeah, as I'm looking at Rebecca, two titles over there are sticking out at me. One is Gray Brecken's Imperial San Francisco right there, and the other is David Talbot's Season of the Witch. There's some interesting things going on in San Francisco now that I think are incredible opportunities. And I actually think that as painful as it has been, both economically and personally and psychologically, in this once in a lifetime, or hopefully once in a lifetime, the last time it happened was the Spanish influenza pretty much 100 years ago, the post-COVID-19 pandemic reality that we're in now, I think is actually, if done right and thoughtfully and intentionally, a huge opportunity for reimagining a lot of what ails us in San Francisco, including in the area of those of us who are unhoused. And I remind people in all of our challenges that virtually none of them are unique to San Francisco. I mean, this is a country with vast wealth inequality, and that was laid bare during COVID, and was particularly laid bare in San Francisco, where we have a huge number of extremely wealthy individuals and some of the poorest of the poor who are living in abject misery. I mean, look, I'm not going to claim that any of this is simple, but I think that given the changing economy and the changing value of some kinds of real estate, and I'll give you a little story about this, that there are things that the government can do today that were much harder at the height of the economy in 2019. And so I think this is a place where we can invest in adaptive reuse and create new lower income housing units. I think this is an opportunity where we can invest in the thousands of units of shelter that we don't have. And by the way, people come back, I get this all the time from New York and say, Aaron, New York's pretty good. And I say, yeah, they have shelter capacity for 95% of their unhoused population. We have shelter capacity for 47% of our unhoused population. That's just a fact. And then I say, well, we need 2,000 more shelter beds. And people say, how are you going to pay for it? And here's the answer. And I'll tell you this story because I lived it last year when, for those of you who don't know about mine and my wife's personal life, because we met at the Trust for Public Land in the 1980s. So I've actually done nonprofit real estate for most of my adult life. And that was actually the only thing that I was qualified to do in 2001 when I took the oath of office. That's my wheelhouse. Last year, I don't know if you know this, but one of the unsexy things that the Board of Supervisors does as kind of the board of directors of the municipal corporation that is your government is that we have to approve every lease that the city enters into. And we lease, we've got 34,000 employees and 53 departments, and I'm a nuts and bolts kind of person. Last year, our little division of real estate that goes out and negotiates this deal brought us a lease renewal on Mid-Market, 1155 Market Street by United Nations Plaza, not exactly the creme de la creme of, office locations. We had been in that building for 10 years, 100,000 square feet. I'm talking about multiple floors in a high-rise building, Department of Public Health, Human Services Agency. And I looked at the lease that we had to approve, and this is kind of garbage in, garbage out. We generally just approve them. And I looked at it, it was $64.60 a square foot, and I was like, that seems pretty high. This was December of last year. And so I asked the Department of Real Estate to come in and bring the appraisal, and they brought the appraisal in. The appraisal said that the appraised fair market value was $60 a square foot. And so I said, Mr. Pinnock, why would you be bringing a lease to the Board of Supervisors that's higher than your own appraised value? And he said, well, I was hoping nobody would notice that. But the answer is a very tough property owner. We've got all of these, departments in this building, and moving out would cost a small fortune, which is absolutely true. And so if you think about that, we're getting a fair deal. And I said, respectfully, your appraisal is almost a year old. Appraisal is a backward-looking science. The market's going this way. I'm not buying it. And I stood up at the Board of Supervisors and I said, colleagues, trust me, I'm the senior statesman of the Board of Supervisors. We should reject this lease. And my colleagues listened to me. We rejected 11-0. In June of this year, we entered into the replacement lease, literally next door at 1145 Market Street, 100,000 square feet, for $29.95 a square foot.
Wow. Is there a dollar figure on the savings annually?
It was a total savings of $21.5 million. But what it says to me is this is exactly the time that the city should not only be renegotiating hundreds of different leases that we have, and we need leadership to do that. That's hands-on, that's what chief executive does. But also this is the time with 37% office vacancy rate downtown, 22, Transamerica Pyramids worth of vacancy to do that. And this is also the time, our downtown, and I can say this, we worked downtown for many, many years. I know downtown. I worked there. I've been the supervisor for downtown for most of the last quarter of a century. Back in my drinking days, we might have had a couple of drinks at the House of Shields, but there was, if we wanted arts or culture or entertainment or restaurants, we'd go to the Castro or the Mission or North Beach. This is actually an opportunity to reimagine downtown with a whole, with residential and adaptive reuse. And all of that, I think, will create a different downtown. But going to homelessness, so thing number one is we've got a crazy system. We have 9 different departments that have some aspect of homelessness in them. They don't talk to each other. Nobody brings them together. There is redundancies and duplications. There are 248 different providers, most of whom are doing God's work, but they will have multiple contracts with the same and different departments. There is no clearinghouse to bring them together. Systemic management reform of that entire system with hands-on attention to detail management, which I think after doing this for 17 of the last 24 years, I'm ready to do. The other thing is, we suffer from San Francisco exceptionalism to the good, because so many incredible ideas have emanated from this city, and we pride ourselves in that. I mean, I was on the Board of Supervisors when we passed the first universal health care legislation of any city in America, long before Barack Obama was even a candidate for president of the United States. There was no Affordable Care Act. We passed the first minimum wage in any city in America before states and cities started raising their minimum wages. Same-sex marriage. And so we get, and that leads to what I call San Francisco narcissism, which is we can do this by ourselves. No, we can't. We need to have the maturity to lead a groundbreaking regional approach to addressing homelessness. We have to work with the 9 Bay Area counties, with the major cities, Berkeley and Oakland and San Jose, and pool our resources Laguna Honda style to address the magnitude of the substance abuse crisis, behavioral health, homelessness. It is going to require a regional approach. And this notion that we're going to fix it all by ourselves is narcissistic, and it's not going to work. We just passed Prop 1 in the state of California. God bless this state. Billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars, for cities and counties up and down the state of California. And I went to the mayor when that passed back in March and said, what are your plans? And they were small ball plans. It's like, Aaron, we're going to turn 828 Geary Street, which is a city-owned property in the district that I represent, into a 36-bed facility, and we have other plans. And I was like, stop. Ronald Reagan was the guy who abandoned the mental health infrastructure of this state. We need to actually, as a region, start finding, and they exist, underutilized and unutilized state facilities, pool our resources, enter into regional MOUs around operational dollars, and stand up the thousands of beds Laguna Honda style. There are many more points in my crisis to care plan, but I just hit a number of them: shelter bed capacity, affordable housing, systemic management reform, and a regional approach. Those are kind of the big ones. The other thing, and I say this as somebody who just earlier today was working with the United Educators of San Francisco. The shame of this city certainly is homelessness, but student homelessness is at the top of that list, with 1,800 unhoused kids in the San Francisco Unified School District. That is, I think, a crying need. We have virtually ended veterans homelessness in San Francisco. My number one priority is to end student homelessness in San Francisco.
A few years ago, I met the president of San Francisco State, my alma mater, who told me about the huge unhoused college student population they're dealing with, which I know is also a statewide issue. But homeless kids are just heartbreaking. And
by the way, there are many other things that we should be aware of. Rent control, by the way, which we have been unable to extend to building. Many people don't know this, which kind of blows my mind. But rent control only applies to buildings that were built prior to June 13th of 1979. And then the real estate industry that has outsized control in that cesspool that is Sacramento. Even in a Sacramento where there are supermajorities of Democrats both in the state assembly and the state senate, this is 1995, passed the Costa-Hawkins Act, that none of these legislators are willing to repeal, which prevents this city and other cities from extending rent control from its original effective date. That is on the ballot in the state of California. It is Proposition 33. The real estate industry has spent now over $100 million trying to convince people that this is bad. It is absolutely good. I actually already passed legislation at the Board of Supervisors that will automatically extend rent control for the period 1979 to 1994, and if it passes, that will automatically go in place. I wanted to extend it actually to 2024, but I didn't have the votes to do that even on this Board of Supervisors.
What else should we talk about, Erin? What should we, we have 3 of these index cards. We could take questions from the audience. One was already about homelessness that I think you answered. Please talk about your vision rehousing in the West Side. Why aren't you supporting Kay?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, juicy.
Those are good ones. I wanted to interview Rebecca about what she's working on next. There are many places that can and should grow and evolve all over the city, on the west side, on the east side, on the southeast side. But fundamentally, that work, which is called planning, needs to be done with communities, not against communities. And I've lived that in the mid-2000s. And yeah, it took a few years. We rezoned the eastern neighborhoods. And the eastern neighborhoods said, we'll take more height and we'll take more density, but we want provisions for more affordable housing. We want provisions for parks. We want provisions for child care centers. And we worked with professional planners. And by the way, professional planners are no longer interested in working for cities because so many state preemptory laws have basically eviscerated their profession. But we figured out how to create new parks and how to require developers to pay development fees that provided for child care centers and other neighborhood amenities. And that's the exact kind of work that we should do rather than this one-size-fits-all notion. Is there capacity on the west side of San Francisco? Sure. Are there major corridors, Geary, et cetera, that can take more? Of course there are. But it has to be done not to communities, but with communities. Relative to Proposition K, and I say this as somebody who has spent more of my adult life doing park acquisition and open space work than I have local political work, I love the concept of a large park at Ocean Beach. But this goes back to the last thing, which is this is not being done with community. This is being foisted, and we abandoned and really, I think, abdicated the role that a mature government is supposed to play, which is to bring people together and have a conversation. Maybe that conversation ends up in a fight, but you start with a conversation. That conversation was never had. No discussion of what alternatives could look like. No discussion of what impacts might be. No discussions of what costs might be. None of that happened. That was an abdication of responsibility. The Board of Supervisors, and you elect us to do these things transparently and with public comment and participation, makes parks all the time. They don't go on the ballot. We have the power to close streets. That doesn't have to go on the ballot. So the whole way that this has been undertaken, I find to be offensive. And I also have this. Sorry, I'm the son of 2 mental health professionals. So and often I think that my job is not just decision making and policy and this; it's group therapy. I am profoundly aware of the fact that after the real psychological trauma to all of us from COVID, and particularly to our kids, that this is not the time to divide communities. I mean, add 4 years of Donald Trump and insurrection, the uncertainty of Donald Trump going back. I mean, everybody is halfway nuts. And the last thing that your government should do is create this divisive thing on the ballot. It's just not psychologically helpful or healthy.
Thank you. I lived out at Ocean Beach for part of the pandemic, and I really saw how divided the community was about shutting down the Great Highway. And I think I love seeing it shut down on weekends. I get that shutting it down on weekdays fuck shit up. Sends a lot of traffic through residential streets and, creates a lot of problems. So, but that's a whole other, but just the idea that the community should participate and decide and feel respected and have some ownership makes sense. Does that apply? Did the 30-story tower die already?
the 50-story tower has died. But that goes back to the fundamental thing. I mean, that 50-story tower is the fact that it could even be proposed is a function of the fact that the state has eviscerated local authority over much of our zoning and planning functions. I mean, historically, the state trumped cities in the field of transportation under the theory that transportation, moved across city and county lines, and so people would come to me and say, "Aaron, can't you turn this street into a 20-mile-an-hour street?" And I would say, "No, actually, I can't. That is in the state vehicle and highway code." You may see that recently we've designated certain streets as 20-mile-an-hour streets. That took a change in state law. But land use has always been the purview of local governments until the last number of years, much of it ironically led by our own state senator, who even this last year tried to take Ocean Beach and the western edge of San Francisco out of the jurisdiction of the California Coastal Commission, which fortunately I found a supermajority unveto proof membership of the board to oppose, and that was ultimately taken out of Scott Wiener's bill, and the Coastal Act remains intact for San Francisco County.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got one more card here. Are people doing more cards? And then we'll take questions from the audience. And things are looking more difficult for the state of education in San Francisco. Do you have any thoughts about what needs to happen at San Francisco Unified and CCSF? Any endorsements for the boards? What specific role can the city play in alleviating the crises facing education here?
Yeah,
Good questions.
Yeah, let me start by saying that there is no you know this refrain how teachers and society says one of those little kids in your class could become president of the United States. Well, weirdly enough, my claim to fame is that I went to kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, not just at the same school, but in the same class. Mrs. Rader's kindergarten class, Mrs. Wilson's first grade class, Mrs. Hotta's second grade class, and Mrs. Jones' third grade class with a little girl named Kamala Harris. And Mrs. Wilson, an African-American woman who was our first grade teacher, was a profound influence on everybody in that class. And if you look at that picture, it is black kids and white kids and Asian kids. It's a amazing image. And when Kamala graduated from what was then Hastings and now UC School of the Law, she actually had Mrs. Wilson come to her graduation. And when we talk about democracy being on the ballot, the number one thing to keep this country a democratic country is to educate our kids. It's determinative of your future, of your economic and your physical and mental health. I mean, it is the most important thing that we can do, and our schools, I think, have a lot of hope, but they are in crisis. I think that if we had, sorry to use the term, adult supervision, that the city of San Francisco, which does not preside over the school district, we do not make curriculum decisions, we don't make admission decisions, they have their own elected board, but the city could really be a real and meaningful partner with the school district. We could create the space to bring in civic leadership, philanthropic leadership. I think that we could really be a convener. Weirdly enough, today, this very day, and don't ask me how this happened, but my office has a relationship with a school in the Mission, Buena Vista Horace Mann, which is a pretty incredible school, and they actually every night turn their school into a homeless shelter, which is a remarkable thing. But here we are, well into the 21st century, and they cannot use their drinking fountains because there is too much lead in them. And my office went and got our 5-gallon water cooler jugs from all of the other offices, my 10 colleagues. And today, I mean, I'm busy running for mayor, but today we delivered 13 of those jugs to this school. How screwed up is that, right? And as I was standing there talking to the principal, Claudia, who weirdly enough I've known since she was a little kid. She's a District 3 kid, and I know her mother. And I was like, this is not really a sustainable thing. Like, I can't keep bringing you 13 5-gallon jugs that I'm begging from my colleagues. We need to, get you a permanent fix until someday the school district redoes your plumbing. And within about 10 minutes, I called up Dennis Herrera, the head of the PUC, and said, what do you have? And I called up the head of the Department of Emergency Management because we're always ready for an earthquake. And in the next few days, we're going to give them a fix that's going to last until 2026 or 7 when that is the kind of detailed, hands-on, caring leadership that this city needs. And that's not a plug for me running for mayor. That's the way the city needs to collaborate with the district and students and families and school sites.
I know there's a bunch of questions here. Let's start with this guy.
My life in San Francisco is in the nonprofit community arts world. My experience in the 60s and 70s was a vibrant world for artists and community arts groups. I've seen that in the last 50 years go downhill, and artists having to move out of town because they can't afford, and community arts groups losing their character, losing their capacity to exist. Do you have any reaction to that? What's your approach to it?
I think the number one thing that we need is affordable artist housing. And I think that's kind of where it begins, and then the ecosystem will figure it out if artists can continue to afford to live here. And what I am interested in is creating permanent, affordable artist housing. It's been done in New York. It's been done in other cities. There is somebody here named Randall Klein who is trying to do that in San Francisco. He's the guy who started SF Jazz and is now retired from SF Jazz and is actually working on creating artist housing and is wrestling with all of the very interesting and well-intended state and federal fair housing laws, of which I'm helping him figure out ways to deal with. Actually, this was my then colleague supervisor, Sandra Lee Fewer from the Richmond district, she was formerly a school district board member, and she was very interested in creating permanent affordable housing for SFUSD teachers and paras and staff. And we teamed up and passed, we had to put them both on the ballot, 2 pieces of seminal legislation that led to the 140 units at the Shirley Chisholm Apartments, the former Francis Scott Key site. And I think there are opportunities to do that for artist housing in San Francisco at scale. And one of this goes back to the housing discussion. There has been a narrative that I think that we should reject that has been funded by real estate speculators and developers, that we are in the middle of the most acute housing crisis in this city's 150-year history, and parenthetically that I am responsible for it. I think we should reject that narrative for a whole number of reasons. Number one, we are in the middle of an affordability crisis, which is not exactly the same as a housing crisis, because a lot of the people who are funding this narrative want to build $3,000 a square foot luxury condos on the waterfront and are interested in total deregulation so that they can do whatever they want and repeat the mistakes of redevelopment, the Fontana Towers, and turn Ocean Beach into Miami Beach. And I think that would be a huge mistake that we'll regret for generations. What we need is housing that is affordable to our artists and our teachers. And what people don't know is, or many people don't know, and it kind of blows my mind, but there are over 73,000 shovel ready, fully permitted, totally entitled, ready to build units that are in the pipeline right now that are not being built, not because of NIMBYs, not because of Aaron Peskin, but because interest rates have been high and they don't pencil. And one of the things that this government can do, and it took me, maybe I should have realized this earlier, but we sell tax exempt revenue bonds at very low interest rates all the time for things like rebuilding our water delivery system and our sewer system. They're infrastructure bonds. And I finally, after wrestling with tax lawyers and the state franchise tax board for a year, realized that we can use that exact instrument, not paid for by property taxes, not general obligation bonds that we vote on, to build middle income affordable housing that's affordable to artists and nurses and teachers. And last month in September, that became law, and it is a great tool for developers to use to convert vacant offices to housing in our downtown, and to otherwise build things that are an average of 100% of area median income, and some of that holds promise for the artist community.
I have to leave you, but thank you so very much. I appreciate your answer.
You bet.
And we had a question back there, sir.
Just a definition of adaptive reuse, what does that mean?
Adaptive reuse means instead of tearing something down with all of that sequestered carbon in it, it means figuring out a way to bring it to a new purpose. So it could be, I mean, in what we've seen downtown is that here's downtown vocabulary for you. 3 classes of buildings: Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A are your luxury Salesforce towers, and Class B and Class C are your older, historic, smaller buildings. Think Kearney Street, operable windows. They tend not to be as high, and now, post-pandemic, they tend to be 100% vacant because people who wanted to stay migrated from Class B and C offices to the Class A offices if they were still in business and didn't decamp for somewhere else. And the B's and C's are perfect for replumbing, and they have access to light and operable windows, and they are really potential for housing in our downtown core. And our downtown, if you look at other major American cities, you'll see that they actually mostly have a reasonable amount of office and commercial and residential. Ours, which is a very concentrated downtown, has basically no residential. And I mean, there's nothing to do downtown after, 6, 7 o'clock at night.
Thank you.
Actually, since you mentioned climate, I know mayors around the world have really led on climate, particularly the mayor of Paris. But what can San Francisco do with climate if you're mayor?
Yeah. So I mean, I have to say, everybody should run for mayor. It's a fascinating thing, and it actually has been very heartening. And I have to say that, I mean, I had this worry in my mind, like, how many of us are still here, and is this campaign viable? Everywhere I go, I mean, the Sunset, the Bayview, the Ingleside, the Excelsior, Chinatown, the many Chinatowns, it is very, very heartening. And we go to all these debates, and we are asked the same 3 or 4 questions: housing, homelessness, substance abuse, public safety. Those are the 4 things we're asked. I think we have not been asked a climate change, sea level rise question since I got into this race. On April the 6th, I stood up in Portsmouth Square with 800 or so of my friends. I see a few faces in this crowd that were there that day. And I actually spoke about climate change being the imperative of our time, particularly at the tip of a peninsula that is surrounded by water on three sides. And I had the honor of representing you for quite a number of years on the California Coastal Commission, and I am the second longest serving member now of the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. That is the three women in the 1960s that we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to, that I think Rebecca has referred to in some of her works. Sylvia McLaughlin, Kay Gullick, and Esther Kerr created a little organization called Save the Bay that led to the passage of the McAteer-Petrus Act, and we had by then filled in a third of our estuary. Now, almost a half a century later, it is actually a little bit larger than it was. They have actually recovered some of the bay through that, and the BCDC, as it's called, is become the climate change agency for the San Francisco Bay, and some counties have been much more interested, engaged, and accepting, and some less so. We have some very, very difficult decisions to make. We also have a lot of little things that we are doing and more that we must do that collectively have impact. And this is a story that I like to tell, but in 2000 and, what year was it, Nancy, that we went to the Conference of the Parties in New Delhi? This is where the climate accords, we went to the COP8. We've now, they're held internationally. This is where all of the governments of the world agree on emission standards and what have you. We went to the 8th one, and I came back with a religion and insisted, and Willie Brown thought I was absolutely out of my mind, but I prevailed in adopting LED technology in all of our streetlights, green, yellow, red. And Willie was like, kid, you're crazy. Like, there's no way we're going to make this, I think it was $23 million cash outlay for refurbishing all of our streetlights. They work just fine. These incandescent bulbs are great. Anyway, I prevailed in that fight, and in 36 months, we had paid back all of our investment through saved electrical costs. Now we have them in all of our streetlights. I mean, all of our overhead lamps. There's many of these kind of decisions that we have to continue to pioneer, but we also have some profoundly big, I'm talking about building the pyramids, the great cathedrals of Europe type decisions to make relative to what parts of the city we are going to armor, where we are going to have managed retreat. And those are the conversations that we are going to leave to our children and our children's children. And those are hard conversations to have. Those are conversations that cities like Pacifica have refused to have, and Mother Nature bats last. And we've got to, and by the way, we have profoundly important pieces of infrastructure that we do not see. They are under the Embarcadero, that are the sewage trenches large enough to drive a semi down that are buried beneath the Embarcadero. We have similar infrastructure out on the Great Highway. The Oceanside plant, we know, is going to have to be moved inland. These are the kind of policy and financial conversations that we need to start having now, because this is what we're going to leave the city and our kids with.
Yeah. Oh, who else? Ooh, hello, woman with the arm way back there.
With the Aaron Peskin button on, I can see from here.
I know you all got arms, but the woman with the arm up.
One of the things, obviously, that overlaps with climate change is public transit. Now,
Public transit.
Public transit.
Some of us, gimps like me, will always need access to motorized vehicles. Maybe also parents, other people, but there's a lot that could be done with public transit that's not being done. Jeffrey Tunlin, who said he'd like to see no cars in San Francisco, his idea of increasing public transit ridership is to make driving hell. Take away the parking spaces, fuck the small merchants, and just make it more and more difficult. My idea is that the way to increase public transit ridership is to improve public transit.
Yes.
What ideas do you have for that?
Mara, I think that the number one thing, these are not mutually exclusive concepts, but yes, we have to have a world-class, and by the way, when you go to other cities, I'm always proud of Muni. When you go to other countries, I always realize how much better our public transportation system can be. I mean, I would have killed to have this in the East Bay where I grew up. But the number one thing around public transit really is stable streams of funding. Fare box recovery, which by the way is the largest form of operating for BART, is the smallest form of operating for the SFMTA. It's about, our fare box recovery is around 27%. And so having other streams of money to have a robust public transit system is what the game is really about, particularly if you're going to have fares that everyday people can sustain. I will tell you my history on this, which is endless and Sisyphusian, but I am very proud that I authored the legislation that all you voted on that made us the first and still the only city in California that has an Uber and Lyft tax. And we have to do more of that. And Proposition L on this November's ballot, I commend to you because it does more of that. But in order to sustain a world-class system and to have the rolling stock that we need, we've got to have a robust source of ongoing stable funding.
Did you want to wind it up or another question?
I'm happy to wind it up.
Okay.
Okay, I want to say something on my behalf before you say something on my behalf. There are 5 days, 1 hour, and 5 minutes until the polls close. I am the only person in this race who is not funded by at least one billionaire. And it's not that I've got a thing about billionaires. I actually, when people just blindly trip out about billionaires, I remind myself of a guy named Chuck Feeney, who some of you may have heard of. He started a little company that spread around the world called Duty Free Shops. And this guy gave away all of his money and there were no strings attached. Those are not the billionaires that I'm dealing with right now. These people are, San Francisco is like a trophy prize to them. They are pushing the city absolutely in the wrong direction for their own self-interest. And by the way, some of these folks like Bill Obendorf are right-wing, not in San Francisco terms, in American terms. I'm talking about $13.6 million to the likes of Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, anti-labor, anti-choice. I mean, these are not what we would call San Francisco moderates. Those are the people who are funding my opponent's campaign. We are doing remarkably well. The last poll, tracking poll dated October 18-19, has me tied in first place votes with Daniel Lurie. This is absolutely winnable. I need your help. There are still a ton of low information, undecided voters out there. I was walking on Chestnut Street in the marina today with Catherine at the back of the room. You would be amazed by how many people are like, oh, wow, there's a mayor's race and you're running for mayor. Tell me what it's about. And I'm like, yeah, okay. If you want to volunteer, we have just endless opportunities from morning until night. And Romlin will tell you how. You can make phone calls, you can knock on doors, you can still take a window sign, you can be like Mara back there, a walking billboard. Thank you for waving that sign around, Catherine, by wearing a button. We don't have a political action committee that is, I don't know if you saw this on Friday, Michael Bloomberg, who had already given the Mayor's Political Action Committee $1.25 million, added another $250,000. On the same day, crypto billionaire Chris Larson, who had already given the mayor $1 million, gave her another $250,000. There's big money out there, over $30 million in this mayor's race so far, of which I account for less than 10%. We took public financing, which gave us $1.2 million. We have raised now almost $1 million in contributions from everyday San Franciscans. Yesterday was a big day. We crossed the 5,000 contribution mark. Over 5,000 individuals have made a donation to this campaign, which is really incredible. That's like 1 out of every 200 registered voters has actually made a contribution to this campaign, which brings tears to my eyes and does not stop me from asking you for more. So if you would like to do that, we have a URL for those of you, or you can write a check to Aaron Peskin for Mayor 2024, or you can go to our website, which is aaron2024.com. But every dollar is going to count. I've run for office 5 times. I have never lost. I have never done TV before, because who would do TV in 1/11 of the city? It's very expensive. But we are doing TV, and I will tell you the story. We got an ad agent, and we did this ad, and which required me to swim from Alcatraz. Yeah. And which is not that far. Everybody thinks it's far. It's not that. Have you ever done it, Dan? You ever? No.
It's far enough.
It's far enough. But the bad part was that he didn't like the way I dove off the boat. So he made me dive off the boat 6 times, and then I had to swim from Alcatraz. At any rate, we gave the ad agent all this money, and she sent me back an email that said, your ad score is 138. Daniel Lurie's ad score is 762. I had no idea what this means. So I sent her back an email, and I said, well, what does it mean? She said, it means that for every one of your ads, Daniel Lurie is airing 7.5 of his. And then she put at the bottom, but your ad is 10 times better, so don't worry. I'm telling you this story because I want to keep that ad on the air for the next 5 days, 1 hour, and 3 minutes. So give us some money, and thank you, Rebecca. I'm a huge admirer.
It's mutual, Aaron. I'm going to volunteer. I think I'm going to donate again. And how many of you are going to volunteer? Look at all those arms. Do we have more arms? Yeah. It's fun. It lets you meet the city. And as I heard when I was doing some Arizona, Nevada stuff, you don't want to wake up a week from today and feel like, oh my God, we lost by a tiny margin and now MAGA is taking over San Francisco. Because MAGA is trying to, the billionaires, the terrifying billionaires, the Elon Musky right-wing ones really want it. They see this city as like a insubordinate woman they want to crush and control. And the way they talk about it is just kind of gross. And they also have to make up all kinds of ugly stuff like we're, the doom loop cesspit of crime, afraid, all those those guys in their 30s who claim they're afraid to walk down the streets that I at 63 have been strolling for 44 years are, wusses. But, it's not like he's running against the other people. I have to say, if you were running against John Avalos, Tom Amiano, and Matt Gonzalez, I'd be like, hey, whatever happens is cool. I actually worked on all their campaigns, but whatever else could happen is uncool. So we need to elect Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all for coming.